I worked at a small startup that didn't last very long. I then joined the company that I am right now, which I've been for the last 17 years. And during that time, I went from junior engineer to senior engineer to the head of engineering, which is my current position. So, excuse me. So, as far as the topics that I'd like to talk to you today. Oh, just if it's not clear, I'd also like your grace here, since public speaking is really not something that I do. So, the three questions that I'd like to answer about business is quite simple. Like, what is business like in this world? What kind of business are we in as believers? And how are we supposed to go about this business that we're in? And then after that, I'd like to kind of tie it together with this notion of integrity. We'll talk about a little bit about what it is, and then really be about being true to who you are. So let's begin. So what kind of business is this world in, right? So just to kind of start, I'd like to talk to you about my current home. I live in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it is quite simply one of the most beautiful places that you could ever be. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but it's a little bit like Costa Rica. You know, it has a little bit of everything. You go to the north, to the mountains. You go to the west coast for the beaches. You go to, you can go surfing in the water. In the east, there's deserts, if you like. There's the redwood forest in the north, and to the south, there are these beautiful coastlines like Carmel and Monterey, which you may have heard of. However, things are not so perfect in the city. A recent study showed that San Francisco was number one in the least unchurched city in America. It actually beat New York City, which is, you could argue is the capital of the world business. It even beat Las Vegas, which in America we call Sin City. And Las Vegas was only number 6, but San Francisco was number 1. But I'll tell you, the fact of the matter is that in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, there is a great number of people that are very religious. Now, it's not exactly the same kind of religion that we're familiar with. It's kind of a different kind of faith. They have their prophets, people like Steve, Mark, Elon, Larry, and Sergey. And they have their temples, their holy sites, their shrines. This is called the spaceship. I don't know if you've ever seen photos, but it's in construction right now. People from all over the world come to take pictures of themselves in front of this sign in Menlo Park. And the Googleplex, rather well known as well. So this faith, like other religions, comes with promises of blessings and unimaginable wealth, for example, power, glory, happiness, right? And so the people, these very young and very intelligent people, come and they sacrifice their precious time, their families, their loved ones, for the promises of these blessings, right? And it's not just the material blessings. Even Steve Jobs had this quote where he talked about this purpose of his life, right? We're here to put a dent in the universe, right? Eternal hopes. But there's a problem. I can assure you that even as great as Steve Jobs was, there is no dent in the universe, right? And for the truest believers of this faith, in their heart of hearts, they're looking for the same things that we all look for. They're looking for a sense of fulfillment, a sense of meaning, right? Ultimate purpose and self-worth. The problem, of course, is that even though, no matter how appealing or how awesome or clever these ideas that they have as far as the company is concerned, that there's just no way that this activity, this company can bring ultimate peace to our souls. It's just not what it's for. It is, in fact, the promise or the hope of this religion is founded on a lie. So, what about us? What kind of business are we to be in? All right? Well, let me first of all provide some context. So, at the cross, when Jesus was up in the cross, he said quite famously, he said, "It is finished." Right? And what he was talking about was that the deepest and the deepest work for our very souls was finished. It was completely done. So the truth is, we no longer have to look for other things to provide all of the things that people are looking for, right? The self-worth, identity, right? Ultimate meaning. It is done. And this is something that's very important for us to remember. In fact, he goes even further. The Bible goes even further, saying that, in fact, there's nothing else to be boastful about. We have nothing left to, not our families, not our cars, not our jobs, nothing except the cross. So this is how complete and comprehensive this grace or this work that Christ had finished on the cross. So what does that mean for us? Can we stop working? Are we all done? Absolutely not, right? So Christ had said, as part of one of his goals, right, was that we were to build his kingdom, right? He was to be about his Father's business. There's many illustrations of the Bible about this. He says, there's ideas of being fishermen, of farmers, of shepherds. But the one thing that's kind of stuck in my mind as I was thinking about this was this verse where Christ describes the building of his church. He says, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So I'll be honest with you, when I was younger, I used to be confused about this verse, because I had a picture of this great big church, this building, this fortress, and then there were these gates that were being, attacked by this, or attacking this church. But in fact, the image is actually completely backwards. What it is that we as Christians are assaulting the kingdom of this world, the kingdom of hell, right? And Christ's promise is that the very gates of hell cannot withhold us or stop us from our progress into this kingdom. And what are we supposed to do? The Father, this is what Christ described his mission. He says, "The Father has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressors free." So this is our job, right? We are to set the captives free. This is the work of kingdom building. This is the mission that we are. This is the job, the business that we are in. So, as Justin had mentioned in the past, the fact is that for us to engage with the world, there is actually no better place than in our workplace. We spend the most time there. People have an opportunity to see us in a context where they can see who we are by what we do. And likewise, we also interact with them directly to have an opportunity to show, not just talk, but show who we are by our actions. So this brings us back to our third question about business. So now that we know what we do, how are we supposed to go about this business, right? So some of you may be familiar, there's a book by James Collins. It's called Good to Great. And in this, it's a secular book, of course. It's actually management. It's quite a popular management book. He examines the qualities of these, he calls like level 5, these great companies that make the jump from being ordinary to great. And so he describes the qualities necessary, in particular the leaders. He says that the great CEOs, the level 5 CEOs, look out the window to attribute success to factors other than themselves. When things go poorly, however, they look in the mirror and blame themselves, taking full responsibility. The comparison CEOs, or the ordinary CEOs, they're often doing the opposite. They looked in the mirror and take credit for success, but out the window to assign blame for disappointing results. So what does this tell us? Surprisingly or not, the very qualities that we need to be successful in business turns out to be the very qualities that Christ himself commands us, encourages us to do. It's to be humble, right? Generous, not self-centered, right? So the idea then is that with these Christian qualities, there's an opportunity for success. And as Harry Truman once said, you can accomplish anything in life provided that you do not mind who gets credit. This quote actually becomes doubly true for Christians, because the fact is, the promise becomes we will accomplish great things as long as we give God the credit. So just to give a quick word of caution here, when we talk about success in the kingdom, we are actually talking about toward the building of the kingdom. This is not necessarily worldly success, but he does, of course, promise to provide for us all the things that we do need. So this actually reminds me of when I used to go to church or lived in New York City, there was a pastor that told me this story about this woman that he met at church for the first time. She was visiting and seemed quite lost. And so he'd approached her and asked her, how is it that you came to visit our church? And he said, she said it was because of my boss. It's kind of interesting, right? So he asked her a little bit more about it, and she told him that at her job, she was not very spiritual at all, so this is the part. At her job, she had made this terrible mistake. And instead of allowing her to take the blame, her boss had actually took the responsibility entirely upon himself. And of course, this was surprising for her, and so when she asked him, he explained to her, I've been at this company much longer than you have. I have the capital to survive this. And so, it made sense. And then he stopped and said, but the truth is, it's because I am a Christian. And this is exactly what Christ had done for me, and this is exactly what he had called us to do for others. And then, of course, that was when she decided to visit this place, which, had this lesson. This is a famous quote. I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Elliot, but he is a missionary, the former missionary to South America. And he said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." And this is really the strategy that we can apply as we are in the workplace, right? So the idea that I like to convey here is for those that are truly saved, we have an opportunity, right? We have the freedom to be a light in our workplaces because we have already received everything that we need, right? And the other side of the coin is that people whose self-worth and identity is tied to their work, at some point, no matter how great they are, they will hit a point where it's literally impossible for them to sacrifice anymore because it would mean sacrificing their identity. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about integrity, but just to review, so what we saw is that when we asked the question, what is the business world like? It's based on a lie. What kind of business are we in as believers? We're to set the captives free, right? And how do we go about the business? Humility, mercy, generosity. We give God the credit. All right, so to tie this all together, I'd like to talk a little bit about integrity. And so, then the common definition of integrity, of course, as we all know, maybe we don't, is about being honest, right? Moral, ethical. But there's a second definition which is closer to the Latin root. It's integer, which is the opposite of a fraction. That is to be a whole, not divided, right? Not having compartments. So the lesson here is to be true to who you are, right? What do I mean by that? So for the non-believer, no matter how good they want to be, ultimately, because their meaning is tied to building their own kingdom, there will always be a limit, right, to the acts of goodness that they can do. But on the other side, for us as believers, right, we have been given everything that a heart needs. And so it is actually possible for us to do good. The problem here is that the fact is that even though we have this goodness, it is also possible not to act according to our nature. The Bible describes the story of a servant of a king who had this unimaginable debt. The calculation that came up was something like $10 billion. And because of the servant asking for mercy, the king forgave him. But what does he do? Instead of acting, according to this incredibly generous gift, he turns around and he finds his fellow servant who happens to owe him something in the order of like 16,000. Nothing compared to 10 billion. And what does he do? He demands his friend or his compatriot repay the bill. And of course, as soon as the king hears this, he is immediately enraged and he throws this servant into prison. So this is the idea for us to be true and act accordingly and appropriately to who we are. The truth is that in order for us to be able to truly forgive, to give generously, to love, when no love is returned, is a function of how much we have been forgiven, how much we have been loved, and how much, how generous that we have received. So there is an expression in English. I don't know if it translates well, but it's an expression called business is business. And this is usually used in the context of people that want to, put aside your personal feelings, so that you can pursue profit, the aims, the goals of the company. This expression ultimately is an excuse to, to ignore your conscience, which is, of course, very dangerous. My company, when I was working, the one that I'm working for now, had actually grown from a fairly small company from about maybe dozens or so employees to about 50. And at some point we were purchased by outside investors, private equity firms. This turns out to be a rather normal thing in the Silicon Valley, of course, right, where people are always buying companies. And what happened was, as soon as they came in, there was a distinct change from what was a close-knit band of brothers to being under a group of owners that were really all about the bottom line. We were literally being run and managed through a spreadsheet. Orders were would come down from the executives, basically with salary targets, and people changed from being human beings to numbers on a chart. Of course, that meant that there was quite a bit of turmoil, layoffs and such. And I remember distinctly at one point, at the time I was a senior engineer and I was living and working from Boston, and I could see that the change that had come to our company, and so I flew to California to meet my boss, and so the boss had now become the CTO of this new combined company. I said, you have to help us. We have all of this turmoil. The guys are just doing terribly. We need somebody to protect us. And to my surprise, he refused. And he said to me, you do it. And what I hadn't realized or what I learned then was that he, in fact, himself was just fed up with the new leadership. He was intending to leave. And so the next week, I found myself promoted to manager, and I was brought back to the corporate office in Berkeley, and then it became my job, literally, to protect my friends, my coworkers in this company. So it involved things like just fighting for new positions that they could transfer to. It was just simply being able to argue for raises, for promotions, or it was also, in some cases, for me to recommend my coworkers to find better jobs in other companies, because it was literally the best thing for them. The interesting irony, perhaps, of this, because I had come in, I had very little regard for my own job security. It didn't really matter that much, and so it gave me that freedom to work in order to help my coworkers. So what I'd like to do then is replace this phrase of business is business to I must be about my Father's business. So there's a classic hymn in English, and I'm sure it's been translated to Spanish. It's called "It Is Well With My Soul," and the song basically describes all of these trials and turmoils and situations that are hard, but always simply goes back to the refrain of "It is well with my soul." And this is the strength that we have in our Christ. That is, that no matter how bad things are, it is well in our hearts. In fact, no matter how much success and how much failure we have, our soul and the state of our soul is exactly where it needs to be. That is complete and finished. So, in that regard, I just wanted to remind us that this idea of business is really about, for us, to apply and be a light and be that insurgent army that is invading this world to be a light and a hope for others. All right. Thank you.